Hello and welcome. My name is Melissa Rabronia. I am a trauma-sensitive healing practitioner and educator at healyourheart.love. And today's guest is trauma expert Manuela Mischke-Reeds. Manuela Mischke-Reeds MFT is an international teacher of somatic psychology, trauma therapy, and author. She is a founder of Hakomi Institute of California and Embodywise. She trains, consults, and coaches professionals in varied fields, such as health professionals and business leaderships in stress and trauma and somatic mindful integrative approaches to well-being. Manuela brings together 25 years of in-depth somatic clinical psychotherapy practice and serves as a senior Hakomi teaching faculty. She specializes in somatic trauma therapies, attachment and developmental trauma, expressive arts therapies, continuum movement. She developed a somatic trauma approach, which integrates somatic therapy and wisdom approaches for trauma therapists. She worked collaboratively with first responders, developing a group somatic ketamine-assisted psychotherapy protocol. Her approach to working with trauma is a comprehensive approach that utilizes the depth of the body's knowledge. Manuela is the author of Somatic Psychotherapy Toolbox, which I have here, and it's a wonderful book I highly recommend, and 8 Keys to Practicing Mindfulness, Practical Strategies for Health and Well-being. Her website is manuelamischke-reeds.com and embodywise.com. Hello, welcome, Manuela. Thank you for doing this. So how I know you is as faculty at the Embody Lab in 2 different trainings, and you really stood out to me the way I would describe you, a gentle powerhouse presence.
Oh,
But what I mean by that is like you're right there and you don't miss much. I noticed that about you, and it was your presence. I know these words like embodied presence, but there was just something that you're right there and it's real. I was really honored that I was selected to be like a demonstration.
yeah, we did a demo session
We
together.
did a demo session and it was right in time because it was just before me traveling back to my home country, former Yugoslavia, where I haven't been in 20 years.
Right.
And it was a very helpful session. I didn't know what to expect. I was really surprised because I've had this somatic pattern that I've been working with for a while since I've been doing somatic work, so to speak. And then with you, it was something different. It became this live thing. I remember it started with a sensation, with some story, some processing, and then me swimming,
Mhm.
right? And that all happened in a session with you.
Did you stood up actually at one point? Yeah.
Yes, yes. And then I did actually have the experience of being in the Adriatic Ocean, where I continued that swimming, and then I was reclaiming the ocean. This is where I used to swim as a child. And then I think I emailed you to thank you again.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. It
so
was beautiful to know that. I had hoped that you would have that experience after
thank you.
our session.
So I was away for 5 weeks. I've been back for 7. I'm only now starting to land here. Like I'm
Mm.
still processing the trip, and it didn't help that there's a new war like right here.
Yes. The cycle of human suffering continues, doesn't it? How wonderful that you could see the resolution and the change and the healing that could happen. And in stark contrast with, yes, there's another war and new pain is being inflicted on so many, generations to come, really.
Yes.
Here you are part of the healing process, right? So that's beautiful. Very hopeful. Makes me feel hopeful.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. The thing that stood out for me is that it doesn't feel like there's a lot of healing in terms of people just moved on. There was war, there was trauma, and you just move on. Like you don't actually heal.
I don't know what I haven't followed up on what the government is doing, but I mean there are other cultures like Rwanda who from a government point of view, they actually did a whole social justice and a repairing process with some of the tribes that were massacring each other. So
Right.
unless there's some kind of enlightened leadership that puts into place some kind of community healing, really grassroots community healing, people have to, either take it upon themselves and be so lucky to come across either healers or kind of healing teachings so that they have
Right.
kind of healing happening. But a lot of people, yeah, they just move on and they, that's part of the resiliency of the human spirit. We do move on, but it doesn't mean necessarily that it's processed. And that's the definition also of intergenerational trauma, right? So
Yes.
then the next generation has to basically pick it back up.
Yeah.
Uh, but it's very fortunate when we can have teachers and teachings that we come across and go, wait a minute, there's something here. And then having the courage to go on a healing journey. I mean, it takes a lot of courage, you know it, right? But it
Yes,
takes a lot of
absolutely.
courage to go there and look at it. And that's why a lot of healers are also the ones that, they've gone through their own healing and then know, you know, how to heal is go through your own journey. I mean, that's why a lot of therapists, they usually come from trauma stories.
Well, speaking of,
Yeah.
you have a lovely website. You have two of them. I mentioned them. There's lots on you that people can read and learn. And my curiosity is, why and how did you decide to become a licensed psychotherapist to begin with?
Yeah, that's like you, it's a long story of personal healing, a personal seeking, and then of course, the personal and professional mixes together. But I like you, I come from Europe. I'm half German, half Spanish, and the imprints of World War II and the Holocaust left a big imprint on my family and on my journey. Also, being a bicultural child growing up in Northern Europe and with a father that was Spanish at the time. This was not a multicultural society. So I was at a very early age very aware of being othered, actually,
Mm,
which might be difficult for an American audience to grasp because it's like, oh, these are all Europeans, but there's, as you know, a lot of differences in
I
Europe.
totally understand. Yes.
Hold each other is very, very different in Europe. From an American perspective, it's all European, but it's not like that in Europe. So I grew up with that awareness of being othered and then having this heavy history of the Holocaust and a lot of pain and suffering that I was aware of that had happened for the Jewish people and then also for the Germans who kind of basically tried to stuff it all,
Yeah.
and move on, my grandparents and so on. So it put me on it woke me up to an awareness of human suffering. And I always was kind of I had a little bit this little seed that I carried in me is like, there must be something you can do about that. I saw the pain that my grandmother had, the pain my parents had, and there must be something that can be done. So it was through movement, actually. I was a dancer at a very young age.
Oh.
I started dancing, and then I think I was like 16 or 17 or 18, something like that range. I was given a class with young children. So like, oh yeah, you're a dancer. You just take this class and teach them. And I had no idea how to teach young children. I knew nothing other than how to dance. And so I started to quote make it up.
Mm.
And these were all children, a lot of them that had some challenges in school. They were learning challenge, but they loved dancing. And it was the nonverbal language of dancing that we started to have fun and communicate. And then I just basically made up a curriculum. And then they invited me into the school because the teachers saw that there was some kind of change in these kids happening and they didn't know what it was. And I had no language for it. But a friend of mine came to see my teaching, and she says she was a trained teacher for kids, and she says, "Oh my goodness, you're teaching dance therapy," and I'm like, "Dance therapy? What is that?" And
Ah.
so it put that seed in my mind to go like, "What is this?" And I started to research, and then I connected with the one dance therapist that was at the time in my hometown, Hamburg, Germany. And she said, well, if you're serious about learning about dance therapy, what this is, you have to go to the United States. And so I was actually on the track to become a journalist. I was more interested in writing stories and things like that. So then, long story short, through Asia, through Australia, you name it, I ended up in the United States and then started to study dance therapy and more dance experiences and had a lot of also training in African dance where I personally had a lot of spiritual awakening through movement.
Mm.
So somatics was my language.
Mm.
There was something about reading the world, the nonverbal world, people's bodies that was very, very easy for me at an early age. And so then I came to Naropa University. I studied more dance therapy, fell in love with Hakomi.
Mm-hmm.
which is a body-oriented somatic psychotherapy. And then one thing led to another. Then I studied Hakomi and somatic experiencing and you name it, many, many different modalities. And it was through some of the first populations that I worked with as a young clinician, still in graduate school. I worked with political torture survivors, that I began to understand that the language of the soma was really a powerful tool to heal trauma. And Peter Levine had just come on the scene. Peter Levine was not somatic experiencing that. And so with his training and Hakomi and all the other modalities that I had studied, I began to understand that really the bottom-up process that we now call it, the somatic process, was a powerful tool to work with trauma. So those were kind of the key waking up moments for me. And I began to just throw myself into working with lots and lots of different populations and clients, and started to teach Hakomi and movement and attachment work and yada yada. But it was really through these experiences with clients and how to reach them, like the unspeakableness of trauma that sometimes you can't verbalize, you can't understand, you can't even contextualize it, that moving, sensing, feeling, allowing time, and moving your way through trauma was really part of the resolution of trauma. So that's
Mm.
the short version of it.
Yeah, and thank you for sharing it, because I was going to ask how you got into somatic work. You just answered that. Working with people that have been tortured sounds very intimidating and heavy. I'm just amazed that you did that, because people are innately traumaphobic, but so to just really
Yeah,
go,
yeah,
what drew you to that, and how was the experience, if you don't mind sharing?
yeah. I love that you're asking that. Not many people ask me that actually. I agree, it is very heavy, but I had also at the same time, I started to have a lot of Dharma training. So I studied to be a meditation practitioner. I was very fortunate to have some beautiful teachings. And one of the teachings from Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche was about the inspiration of a health professional. And that when you're learning this craft, basically your job is to inspire health and well-being in others. I'm butchering his quote right now, but basically that is the job of us to inspire health and healing. And so my motivation to working with political torture survivors, I kind of dropped into it because my supervisor at the time was starting a clinic, and she said, "Who wants to intern here?" And so I said, "Oh, yeah, I do it." And I had expressive art skills with drawing and moving, and these were people from different cultures,
Mhm.
from Cambodia and South America and so on. There was a lot of language barriers. And so using the art process, using movement was a good tool, and using music also. And the reason I was drawn to it because the Dharma teachings really helped me to understand that human life is about human suffering, and we have to come into relationship with that human suffering and not to be afraid of it. It's just another lived experience, and there's actually something there that we
Mm.
can honor, and it's actually sacred. And that's how I very much hold it, that trauma is actually a sacred experience. We don't wish it on anybody,
Yeah.
but the consciousness that gets opened up and the healing and the learning that comes from it is tremendously powerful, that we can't even recognize at the moment when we're going through the horrors.
Mm.
And I knew that intuitively, and partly because of the teachings that I had received. I felt very fortunate that I felt like, well, if that's true, then what is it with people who've been physically tortured? What happens to them? And I was amazed to find these beautiful humans that had gone through tremendous horrors. And a quote that I often use from one of the women that said, "They could break my bones, but not my spirit,"
Wow.
who was physically tortured. And when I heard that, I was like, "What is this?" And I was like
Mm.
25 or 26 years old. I was very
Yeah.
young, and I was like, "What is this?" Somebody who's gone through that kind of experience. And that led me on the quest of like, what is consciousness? What's spirituality? How does that figure into healing work? And somebody holding on to their spirit, even though their physical body is so being tortured. So it made me, inspired me.
Yeah.
So yes, it's heavy to work with trauma, but if we can switch into the worldview of yes, it's part of life,
Mm-hmm.
this happens, then what does that mean to heal, and what does that mean to expand our capacities to hold that too? What can we do here? Because if I'm becoming trauma phobic like everybody else, I'm trying to basically say, oh, this doesn't exist, but it does exist. It's part of the human life experience. And so that to me was not an option. So I felt like, yeah, let's look at it. What does this really look at? It is ugly. It is
Mm,
dark. It can be
yeah.
despairing. And I won't sugarcoat it. I had 3 burnout cycles.
Mm,
I was very haunted by some of these trauma
mm,
stories and what I witnessed. I took breaks. I learned more skills. I dove into what it meant to become secondarily traumatized. As a therapist, you go through these different spirals of your own journey and learning more. And each one of those cycles, I learned more, rather than
mhm.
like, oh my God, this is overwhelming and I can't. I was like, okay, what else do I need to learn? And clearly my training is not over. So
Yeah.
that's how I approached it. And I'm still on that journey 30 years later, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. That's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing. That's very deep and sacred. My understanding that with somatic work, you may not need to share the story or the narration, as they call it. I tend to think that there's room for both, especially if people have not shared it. Because I know in my own life, sometimes it's just like, just this happened. And it was like, whew, and I held it in. What have you found in your work, especially now as a somatic psychotherapist? Do trauma survivors need to share their story? And is that part of the healing journey, in your opinion?
They do. They do need to share it, but at what time, for what purpose, and to whom?
Yeah.
That's the question. There's such a thing as trauma identity.
Hmm.
And so you can begin to define yourself by your trauma, which is not helpful, right?
Yeah.
Because then you're basically reinforcing the same narrative. I am a survivor of whatever.
Yeah.
It can be helpful in the first stages of therapy when you're claiming your story. And this happened to me, this was real, right?
Yeah.
Especially, for example, sexual abuse survivors, especially at a young age, to go like, this actually happened to me. I need to own that.
Yeah.
Can be incredible identification. But then on the trajectory of 10 years later, maybe that's not very helpful to just identify yourself or define yourself by only that.
Yeah.
So it really depends on where somebody is on the healing trajectory. It can be very important. Of course, you need to share the story, outing a secret, outing a shame, because trauma and shame also go together. Outing a shame, talking about how shameful something was, or actions that you've done, right, that caused maybe moral injury. Veterans, right, that suffer
Yeah.
from moral injury, to be able to own that and say, yeah, I've been also traumatized by being in this role of being a soldier and killing somebody else. My humanness did not want to do that, that
Yeah.
hurt me, that traumatized me. So these stories are important to share, but when do we share them, at what time, and to who, and is there a receptive ear?
Hmm.
If it's about in therapy, you want to go also, how does the trauma show up in the body? We're talking about fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. And we're trying to help the person to unstuck those responses in order to progress on letting go of frozen response, or a highly activated sympathetic charge state, or dorsal vagal shutdown state. Those are psychophysiological, biological processes that we try to help the person to move on. But the hard work is actually, what did the person believe and the identifications to what happened.
Mm.
You can go back to a memory and release and shake and metabolize all that trauma. That's like part one.
Yeah.
Heavy lift actually is, what did you believe then, and what do you believe now, and how do you identify yourself, and what are you going to do with the insight and the healing that's coming, because that's critical in how you live a
Yeah.
life. So
Yeah.
if it's just about like, okay, now I'm recognize how bad it was, and now I don't need any therapy anymore, and now I'm going to make a living out of, I mean, I'm exaggerating, but a living out of my identification, that's an incomplete healing process in my view. The full
Mm.
arc is really also coming to acceptance, forgiveness, and helping others.
Mm.
And that's often forgotten.
Yes.
And so a lot of trauma therapy in the beginning is like, it's about my process, me, which is great.
Yes.
But if you stay there, then you don't go through the complete arc, because ideally we want to then give back to how I have been helped. How can I help others? That doesn't mean everybody has to be a therapist, but can I be a kinder, more gentle person in the world? Can I be a
Yeah.
better boss? Can I be a better parent? Can I be a better partner? right? Things like that. So how do I
Right.
give back what I've learned and manifest that into my life to contribute to a better collective, a more enlightened society, right?
Yeah.
So one would, in the time that we're living in this time where therapy is about a very individual process, but it
Yeah.
never is. It's
Yeah.
always the individual in relation to the family or society, the system, right? It needs to be interconnected. That's where the true transform, I think, in my view, the transformation happens because then you're contributing to truly making a change for everybody else, right?
Yeah. Beautiful. Thank you. And the question I was going to ask, which is why should people care about somatic trauma therapy, which I think you just answered.
Trauma lives in the body. It's a
Yeah.
psychological process along with the belief systems, but we experience through feeling and sensing, we experience our world and we get stuck in some of these psychophysiological responses to threat.
Hmm.
So if we get overwhelmed with a fear response and that doesn't get processed because it wasn't safe enough, I might constantly activate my own freezing response, saying with somebody who gets stuck in a more sympathetic charge and is aggressive or flees, you can get stuck in those responses. So you definitely want to work with the somatic level. That's not the story. This is where I think there's a misunderstanding sometimes about just working with the body versus the narrative.
Yeah.
There's a phase where you want to uncouple that so that the person can really feel themselves as a process moving through.
Yeah.
Then you need to come back to, well, how do I embody my story now?
Yeah.
How do I, because we're meaning making creatures, we make meaning all the time, and there's nothing wrong with it, but a lot of meaning is limiting,
Hmm.
right? So how
Yeah.
do I update my meaning now, right? If I, felt unsafe in the world, but now I actually feel safe enough, well, where, with whom, and in what situation do you feel safe enough? So it's updating some of those beliefs, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I can feel that. And it brings me to being socially conscious.
Yes.
So I'm trying to navigate being a good human in the world today, mostly healed. I used to attend Marianne Williamson's lectures. She used to say that you have to kind of like live your incarnation. So if you're this tribe, that's part of your path in a way. So for me, being from former Yugoslavia, and I kind of like didn't want to look at it, and now I'm like going back, looking at it, and it has integrated me on some level. But then there's a part of me like, I can't do it all. There's so many wars. Where do I find the balance? Just curious about how you navigate
Yeah,
that.
I don't know if I have an answer here. I have my own
Yeah,
musings, but I think that we're beyond the tribes. I think that we're part of a human tribe, and this is what we're waking up to.
yeah,
The whole change about understanding systemic racism, colonialism, our tribalism that we're in, they're
yeah,
all fear-based. They're all about othering, right? So
yes,
I think that model is getting outdated. It's not being helpful. Doesn't mean we can't have identification to certain customs or cultures, but I think that part of our waking up right now is recognizing that we're part of a human tribe, and this we need to make it better for everybody.
yes,
Absolutely, we get overwhelmed. And do we have the right to go like, oh my God, I can't take this. I need to resource myself. I need to take a break from it. Absolutely. This is learning your own nervous system, learning the capacity of your own nervous system.
yeah,
Also being responsible for like, yeah, this is too much. I'm getting traumatized. I'm getting overwhelmed. I now need to do these kind of self-care techniques. And then to also then, okay, now I have more capacity. What can I do in my small surrounding or my small, environment that I can influence? So I think, because I think the other opposite is like if we go like, well, that's too much trauma and I'm going over here and I'm making sure I'm okay, that's another form of privilege, really, right?
yeah. Hmm.
Some of us can afford to do that. I can turn off
Yes,
the TV because I live in a safe place. I don't have to deal with all of that. So also being honestly recognizing when am I being complacent, when am I trying to avoid it, and when do I have a little bit more of my cup that I can give, right?
yeah,
I think we're in this time, no one person can solve the world's problems. So this is exactly, I think, what's changing. It's about the collective. We're not the imprints of our historical collective trauma has not been to think collectively. And I think
yeah,
that's what we're shifting into. And the pain of trauma often is that it's happening to me, I'm alone, I'm isolated, it's happening to nobody else. That's not true,
Yeah.
right? It's happening to a lot of people. It's happening
Yes.
to a lot of us, right? And even
Yes.
conflict in a faraway country that we might not even have any ties to, it still impacts all of us, right? It ripples through every culture. And that's where the individual trauma meets the collective trauma. There is no such thing as individual trauma. It
Yes.
affects systems and groupings of people. It ripples. So is it okay to take breaks? And absolutely it is. Is it okay to learn about my own nervous system? And no, and absolutely. And for some people, it might take a year or two, for some people, a week. It's
Yeah.
not about you should, it's about learning
Hmm.
about your own rhythm of health and healing. But that goes for the other side too. It's like when I'm then getting too complacent, oh, I'm good. I've got everything squared away, whatever's
Hmm.
happening there. Then I'm also contributing to suffering, right?
Yes.
So it's a thorny question that we're all having to sit with. It's very uncomfortable to be alive at this time.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
All are confronted with it wherever you go. And especially if we're thinking about climate change, like none of us can escape
Yeah.
that. So we're all in this. So we're all sitting with this discomfort. I err on the side of learning about ourselves, learning about our own nervous system, applying a lot of kindness, listening to the rhythm of our bodies, listening to the rhythm of our families, listening to the rhythm of our communities, really tuning into that. And I think when we do that, then we're also getting a lot of new impulses, creativity, healing. I think that also comes along with it. We
Beautiful.
forget that sometimes. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know if
Yeah.
that's an answer. It's just how I locate myself.
It is. No, it is helpful for sure. I think we're all, I love that you're normalizing that it is a weird time to be alive. Absolutely. The world seems very different.
Well, and I think part of it is too that we have human suffering and atrocities have been happening since we
Hmm.
exist.
Hmm.
But now we learn about it in seconds.
Yes.
And we learn about it from all corners of the world, and we don't have enough time to process.
Hmm.
Biologically speaking, we're
Right.
still back in the Stone Ages, right? So we
Yeah.
haven't evolved that much.
Yeah.
So our nervous system's designed to have a stressor
Hmm.
and then process the stressor. And that means time, that means resting and digesting. That means allowing some spaciousness, allowing connection, allowing interacting with others about it. But now we don't have that. So we have instant news, we have instant, we get
Visuals, like literally seeing what happened. Like it's no
we're
longer a story
part of
being
it.
told. It's like, no, I
We're part
saw
of
it.
it. We're
Yeah.
part of it, right? And now
Yeah.
we're kind of fevering to like, what's the end of that trauma? And now another one happens.
Yes.
And it's literally, we don't have the gap. And we know from studies with veterans, for example, that if veterans have one tour after another tour without any kind of resting, that the PTSD symptoms go up. So
Yes.
we're actually equipped for stress. We're even equipped for trauma.
Yeah.
If we don't have adequate support or this resting and digesting of our own nervous system time, then we can't process it. And that's when we become dysregulated. And that's when we
Yeah.
start having symptoms. So, and I think part of our news cycles and all of that contributes to that.
Yeah.
So we have to be way more educated of how we consume.
Absolutely. I would love to talk about your work because it's just a beautiful way to bring everything back to what you're doing. I know that you are a psychotherapist and you're a teacher. Mainly, what is it that you do? You're training people.
Yes. Yeah, I do a lot of different teaching. I developed my own body of work called Innate Somatic Intelligence Trauma Therapy Approach, or ISITTA.
Hmm.
It's a
Hmm.
mouthful. But basically, it's taking, and I'm a Hakomi trainer. I've been doing that for over 25 years. I teach this body of work called Hakomi, which is a mindfulness-based somatic psychotherapy. And it's using a lot of Hakomi principles and some core Hakomi techniques, and then also other somatic techniques and trauma techniques and movement techniques. And I've kind of integrated that into a model of coming back to igniting people's innate somatic intelligence. Because my view is that underneath every trauma is an intelligence that operates within in all of our bodies and psyche that we can access. That's an inner healing intelligence that we can actually connect with. And so this training is for therapists or people in the healing field that want to learn these it's very somatic. We do a lot of experiential work, learn these different techniques and how to facilitate this process with trauma survivors, with trauma clients. Yeah.
I looked at it. It looks so beautiful. It's really, you have some wonderful teachers, level 1, Ariel Schwartz, Stacey Hain. It's, yeah, it's really amazing. So how long is this something brand new? Has it just started?
No, I've been doing it for years, and
Oh, okay.
yeah, for years and years. It's been under the radar. It was only offered really to Hakomi students before.
Ah, okay.
Because it
Wow.
was
All
like
right.
a year 3 for Hakomi students. I would come into Hakomi trainings and I would, because I had all this trauma knowledge, I would bring it into the Hakomi trainings. And then people said, look, this is so much material. Can you have your own thing? So then I started to create that only for the Hakomi students. And then it had different names, different times. And then I recently kind of redesigned it more as a standalone kind of training. And it also lends itself, because of the orientation of the work, very well for people who are doing psychedelic assisted,
Mm,
because it's so about the innate capacities and a very following the client's process unfolding, which is very much a Hakomi principle, but it's very much about following a process and trusting this process to unfold and then facilitating that, because there's a skill set that you need to develop in your own, what I call therapist seat, that we train for. So it's now its own standalone training. So it has its
beautiful.
name, but it's been around actually for quite a while. Mhm.
Beautiful. Well, so happy to hear that. It looks really, really great
Oh,
and really well done. Is there anything else that you'd like to share that we haven't mentioned yet?
well, yeah, I teach Hakomi trainings, and we're developing also Hakomi psychedelic assisted training next year. So I'm very excited about that, because that's a body of work that's very helpful for that kind of process. I'm doing some writing about that, and I'm also about to finish a book on how to bring movement therapy techniques, a workbook, into the therapeutic process. Because I come from movement therapy, that's been kind of a body of work over there, but I actually feel like it has a place in the somatic psychotherapy world, and I'm kind of passionate about it. I've been, trained in different movement modalities, but one that's been close to my heart has been Continuum, and I bring that into the trauma process. I think that's a very, very powerful, helpful modality to combine with somatic therapy. So that's what I'm writing about right now. So that's hopefully coming. So lots of writing, teaching. That's what I'm doing. Yeah.
Beautiful. Well, thank you. I'm really honored to have you as a guest, and I love what you're doing. I support it. I'll recommend your programs.
Thank you.
And what I like as well is that it's a personal journey. It's a personal somatic journey that makes you a better practitioner.
That's right, because I think it starts with the nervous system of the practitioner, how you sit. I call it the therapist seat,
Hmm.
to become a really loving presence, or
Yeah.
healing presence. You have to not only understand your own story, not only have tools to self-regulate and resource, but you actually have to, like what you were saying earlier, it's so difficult to sit in such immense trauma and suffering. You have to train to be in relationship with that kind of depth of human suffering, and that is a training.
Yeah.
It does take time and skill and understanding the complexity of the interconnection of trauma. Your own, the client, the systems that are at play. It's complex. So it takes that kind of knowledge.
Absolutely. And I mean, they say that in the end, what matters the most is the presence of the person that's sitting across from you, whether it's a therapist, healer, because it's the nervous system feels safe or not.
Absolutely, not their skill level.
Yeah, and not the modality or whatever it is. So
Not the modality at all. I completely agree. There's so many beautiful modalities. They're all good. They're
yes,
wonderful. They all have something to offer, and I think people need to train in many modalities, but it's the presence and your own understanding, your own nervous system in relation to your story and the stories that you're meeting.
hmm,
It's critical how you sit with that, and so that takes time to truly understand that.
it does. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, thank you, Manuela. This has been an
So
honor
thanks
and
for
pleasure.
having me. Thank
Yeah.
I'm so happy you found your Adriatic swimming ability. Get to, especially after a demo, I don't often get to see.
Yeah, I'm really glad I volunteered for that. That was a lovely surprise. It felt like it was perfect.
Thank you so much.
Open up your